Mm.
All right. So, so when we start talking about the offer to purchase, the number one rule, in my opinion, is do not go off of what the MLS says alone, right? So don't start filling off your offer to purchase off of information you're gathering off the MLS. That is like sin number one. You can use it to get an idea, get sort of a direction of what you're going to head when it comes to putting stuff on your offer to purchase, but verify, right? So, you know, even the legal description. I mean, it's easy to go in the MLS and copy the legal description and paste it on your offer to purchase. But that's not what you're going to do. You're going to go to tax records and do the same thing, right? You're going to go to tax records, and we're going to talk about that. So you're going to rely on something outside the MLS to verify that you're putting in the right information. So that's the number one thing I want to start off by saying is just make sure you're going to the right places. And as we go through this, it's going to become pretty clear as to how I do it. So I'm going to share my screen with you. Share. All right. So can everybody see the zip forms document?
Yes.
Okay. So first thing, if you're brand new and you're not familiar with zip forms, you will become familiar with zip forms. So we'll make sure that you're up and running on it. The reality of it is it's a free technology that you get for being a North Carolina realtor. And it has all the forms that are approved in North Carolina. So if it's something that's already ready to go and approved, then it's going to be there. If it's not there, then per North Carolina rules, we'd actually have to get an attorney to draft it. We can't just write out, say, oh, well, they don't have a lease option contract, so let's just make our own. We'd literally have to get an attorney to put that together for us. So all the documents, including this offer purchase that we're going to go through, are on zip forms. And I will make sure that if you're not already set up on this, that we get you set up. It's a really easy process. But this is where you're going to go to fill out all your paperwork. So for every client that I have, or every property that I list, I have a file that has all the paperwork for these people, right? But this is where you fill it out. We're not going to go into getting it signed or once it's signed where we put it and all that good stuff. But this is where you go to fill out all the paperwork for your clients. So with the offer to purchase, what I'm going to do today is go over the blanks. There's a lot of stuff that are not in the blanks that we're going to go through at the very end, which will probably not be today. And on that, when I do that, I'll talk about pieces that are really important to discuss with your client. But today I want to make sure you know how to fill it out. So we're going to go over that. I will allude to some of the sections that don't have a blank, but for the most part, it's going to be filling this bad boy out. So as we go through, there's two other things that I usually have open when I'm dealing with a property, right? So one is going to be the county website for whatever county the property is in. So in this case, we're going to just assume that the house that we're going to do is going to be in Wake County, right? So I go to wakegov.com. I'm going to go to I want to, and then down here it says search real estate records. And then I'm going to put in the property address, right? So we'll use our office address. Right? So here's our office address, okay? And as you, the real important thing on Wake County that helps it make it really easy for you as we go through this is this middle section all the way down has a lot of the information you're going to end up copy and pasting to your offer. So you have a PIN number right here. You have a property description, which on the contract it's going to say other description. That's going to be your property / legal description. And then the deed book and page of when this person bought it is right here. And this is actually a quick clean deed, removing a spouse, but because they've owned it longer. But still, the point is this is the last time that it's showing being conveyed to somebody. So that's going to be important for your offer as well, right? So let's go back to the offer and start talking about it. Okay. So number one, sellers. The The sellers sometimes are listed on the MLS, but again, the reason we're not going to go off of the MLS is because usually it's not all the sellers that are listed. And we also need to verify when we are writing an offer for our client, are all the owners being listed? We need to make sure that all owners are agreeing to sell this property. So again, what I usually defer to is the county records. And what I'm going to do is certainly look here, but it says you deed links to view any additional owners. So the other thing that I can do here is go to WakeGov. What do I want to do? And I can say I want to search deeds, right? And I can go to recordings and real estate, roll down, and then search real estate records. And then down here, the easiest thing you could do really is if I now go back to my summary and I know that the book for this property, I can copy that and I'll remember it's 1907 is the page. But and here's an important part. So now I put in the book and page for this property. Do not hit this advanced search because it just looks so inviting. Like that's what you want to hit to look. That's going to start you over. So you need to scroll down to the search right underneath. So this search button right here, you hit search. And here's the PDF for the deed, right? And basically, again, this is going to be like a quick clean or something. But as I go through it, I'm going to realize that basically it's all under Doug Ebner, and in this case, Cynthia Ebner, waived her rights to the property, right? But I can go through and just see that basically he's the only owner, right? So once I have that, right? So now I can go back to my, I can go back to my owner and I could put in, the name of the owner. Yeah, for the seller. Now for the buyer, again, the question with your buyers is, who's going to be on the loan? If it's husband and wife, are both you going to be listed as buyer? A lot of times that's lender driven. If both are going to be on the loan, typically they're going to want both people to be on the contract. As a reminder, in North Carolina, even if the spouse is not on, they have marital rights. So pretty much even if just the husband or wife is on the property, the other spouse does have rights to the property regardless, right? But find out all the buyers that you need to put on here, and then just make sure you add them, right? So I'll just put my name as the buyer for now, right? And it added my wife automatically there, so that's fine. All right, so again, we figured out seller from tax records and deed. We talked to our clients to figure out who needs to be on this as the buyer. And then now we go down and we talk about the street address, right? So you would think this is a really simple thing. The MLS says 140 Raleigh Street is for sale. That's what we're going to buy. So we're just going to put 140 Raleigh Street on there, right? So again, I definitely want to make sure that I'm checking the tax records. And, again, right here, it does say 140 Raleigh Street is the property. So we're good with that. And we have the zip code 27540. So all that's pretty self-explanatory, but I want to kind of go over a couple hiccups that you could face when you're filling out an offer, especially if it's not in a subdivision. Let's just say that Doug Ebner on the MLS is selling what the listing agent put as 140 Raleigh Street, but he said that it's, instead of being 0.3, he says it's closer to half an acre. And I'm seeing right here that 140 Raleigh Street is only 0.3. So it's not really jiving with what they're saying they're selling on the MLS, right? So I do know that part of what I want to buy is 140 Raleigh Street. But because it's not matching up, I feel like there's probably more to this property than I'm aware of, and I need to figure that out. So what I highly recommend is when you go in, if what you're trying to put on the contract is not matching up with what you're seeing on the MLS, definitely go to, what I typically do first is go to the map. And then here's the property, right? But because again, it's saying 0.3, and this is Doug Ebner, right? But he's selling a little bit more than 0.3. So what I can do is I can go ahead to these tools and I can hit that little finger to select a property, and I'm going to select this one. And if, as you see now, this is also Doug Ebner, and it's another 0.08, right? So it's another little piece of property that he has. And the way they listed on the MLS might not have been correct. They're listing all the property he wants to sell, but when you go to look at it, it's something's missing, right? So in this case, I would probably call the listing agent to verify, but my guess would be that Doug Ebner's trying to sell this particular property in the corner and this little lot behind it, and that matches up with the 0.38 or whatever was in the MLS. So I'm going to need both. So when I put in the addresses, I'm going to have to put in 140 Raleigh Street, and I'm going to have to put in, this is Earp. It's 128 Earp Street. And I'm going to have to put in both PIN numbers, and I'm going to have to put in both legal descriptions. Does that make sense? So this doesn't happen all the time, but it's something you need to be aware of, that if it's not matching up, especially on homes not in subdivision, homes with acreage, older farm properties, things like that, you need to verify with, if your client wants to buy that house with the 15 acres, and you pull up the house on tax records and it's a house on 3 acres, there's more to this picture. And sometimes you need to figure out what it is and then verify with the listing agent. But ultimately, it needs to be on that contract. So if you don't put it on the contract, if you just put the house with the 3 acres, that's what you're buying. And let's say they're asking $500,000 for a house on 15 acres. Your offer says, here's the address, here's the legal description, and the legal description only includes the 3 acres. And you offer 50 grand under asking price. And the sellers just figured that's all you wanted. And they think that maybe you're overpaying for the house on just the 3 acres, but they're okay with it. You know what? That's all you put that you're offering. So they're going to accept it. And then you go to the closing table and you close and you're walking your property, and the sellers are like, what are you doing? Like, I'm walking my property. No, you're not. You're walking my property. You bought the house on 5 acres, right? So that's extreme, but it can happen. So the reality of it is, again, when you're looking up properties to put in the address, even a simple thing as the address, make sure that you're checking the tax records, and the tax records is showing you what you believe you should be buying for MLS. So, you know, make sure that you're double checking that, and get me involved as well if things aren't matching up. And then typically what I do is just make sure we have that on the contract. Now, let's go back, because there's even more to this. So we end up putting in 140 Raleigh Street, right? In this case, he doesn't want to sell that little sliver behind it. He just wants to sell that particular property. So we're good with that. So, you know, we're putting in Holly Springs, you know, County is Wake. That's easy enough, right? And then what we can do is copy and paste, like I said, all this stuff down here. Now, I'm perfectly fine if every single thing isn't mentioned in the description down here. For an attorney, I think what you need is, if it's in a subdivision, great, put it. But if you have the deed book and page, right? So if you have, again, the deed book and page, so we know it's, here's the deed book. I'm gonna paste that in there. And I remember that the page is, I have to keep moving you all. The page is 1907. But then under PIN, again, I have it right here. So I like to not make a mistake, I can just copy the PIN. Copy that. Paste it there. And then other description, like I said, is legal description right here. So even that right there, As long as you know that this address up here and this description of the deed and legal description is the property that you're trying to buy, including all the land and everything else, you're in good shape. Like I said, if there's more to the land, there's other properties, then you would have to list additional addresses, additional descriptions, things like that. So pretty simple stuff, right? So there's one other thing that you need to be very careful with when you're looking up a property. You as the agent have the duty to make sure that you're disclosing things to your client that could be material fact or that could be important to them, right? So let me give you an example of some other things that you need to make sure that you're checking. So on this property, if I go into the account summary again, and I go over to here and I click on the tax bill, and I look at the most recent tax bill, right? And although I think the one under it was the most recent one, but here we go. So what I want you to be checking on tax records, on the tax bill, is right here. So we know that it's in Wake County and they're getting taxed for Wake County, right? That's this section right here. But right above this, in the middle of the screen, it's showing that they are being taxed by Holly Springs. So they are getting city services and being taxed by Holly Springs, right? So you can safely tell your client that, hey, this property, you know, they list it as Holly Springs address and it's in the town of Holly Springs. They're being taxed by Holly Springs, right? So where could this help you in another property, right? Well, let me show you. So if we go up, and I'm just going to do another search of a property, right? So let's just pretend like we are, I don't want to do it this way. Let me do it a different way. Come all the way over here. I'm just going to open another Wake Gov so I don't get off our other screen. All right. So let's say that instead you're going to go buy this property in Apex, right? And on the MLS, you see 102 Butterbiggins Lane, Apex, North Carolina. And your client wants to buy this property. And you're filling out this offer to purchase for them, right? And you know, Brian said, go to tax records and great, everything looks great. It's Apex, everything's great. But Brian said to also check the tax bill just to make sure that everything looks good. So we look at the most current tax. And look here. Here's interesting. They're in Wake, and it's an Apex mailing address, and that's the property address that you're putting on the contract. But guess what? It's in the town of Holly Springs. It's not an Apex. So what if somebody is, I don't know, got a grudge against the mayor of Holly Springs and wants nothing to do with Holly Springs, right? You need to make sure that you let people know, hey, you have an Apex mailing address, but you are in the city of Holly Springs. You are being taxed and getting services through the town of Holly Springs. In this case, it's one of those weird things where they're right on the cusp.
Your voice.
So they basically got these. With that?
Your voice is gone. Now it's okay.
Is it better again?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So yeah, what I was saying is just, you always got to make sure that whatever address that the contract says, is that really the city that they're being serviced by? And you just got to disclose it, right? So that's one other thing to remember is just double check and make sure that they're being taxed by the city. And then what city is it? And if the city's different from the mailing address, just let people know. Hey, Apex address, Holly Springs, you know, you're within the township of Holly Springs and you're being taxed by Holly Springs.
So
Right?
suppose it has Wake County and Holly Springs.
Correct.
What do we do?
Was that?
What do we do if it's in the wrong, it's in a different town? Like that one was Apex and here it says Holly Springs. things.
So you still would put in the mailing address and the address for the property for the description of the contract would still be the Apex address. But you definitely want to disclose to your client that per tax records, this property, albeit it has a mailing address of Apex, I need to disclose to you that you are in the city of Holly Springs. Your services are Holly Springs and your tax Springs, not Apex. So you just have to disclose it. That's all.
Okay, yeah. I was just wondering, was there something you wanted us to do that was different?
Just disclosing. Now, the one other thing that you want to double check is, let's do one other. And so now let's do, I spelled it wrong. I did. All right. Hopefully third time's a charm. It's not. All right. I can pick a different property. I just wanted to see if I can do it this way. All right, so let's see if I can find this. All right, so let's just say that this is the property that's being sold. 2045 Herbert Akins. Again, you copy and paste the PIN, you copy and paste the legal description for your contract, you put in the 2045 Herbert Akins, all that's great. It's on almost an acre, so all that's matching. Everything looks beautiful with this. But again, you go to the tax bill just to double check. And again, in this case, you take a look. Oh, and guess what? They have a Fuquay mailing address. They're being taxed by Wake County, but they have no city taxes. And why is that important to you? Because you need to disclose to your client, hey, your mailing address is Fuquay, but you are outside the city limits of Fuquay. You are not getting city service. They're not going to come and bring a trash can to your door and come collect your trash. We need to set that up for you from an outside service, right? So that is another thing that you want to make sure that you're doing. So again, just check the tax records real quick. It takes 2 seconds. Are they within the city that matches their mailing address? And are they being taxed by that city? If they're being taxed by that city, then they're in the city and they're getting city service. If there's nothing here, hey, good news, Mr. Buyer, you don't pay city taxes. Your tax bill is going to be lower than most people's, right? That's great. But on the flip side, when we go to set up utilities and things like that, we need to call like ABC Sanitation or some other people to set up your trash because you're not going to get some of the city services that Fuquay offers. They're not coming to do street cleaning. They're not coming to pick up your garbage. So that doesn't mean you can't get those things done, but we need to set those up separately. Right? Does that make sense? So it's just a disclosure thing again. Is everybody on board with that?
Okay.
Yeah.
All right. So this is why it takes me so long to go over the offer to purchase, because I bring up all these little things that you guys want to make sure you're doing. All right. So once you get all the property information, right? Now we're down to the important stuff, the purchase price. So this top line is going to be how much does your client want to offer on this property, right? So let's just pretend like we're offering $200,000. You don't have to put the 0.00, just hit the button to go to the next tab and it's going to put the 0.00 for you. So this is the full price that you're offering this property. So you're going to have a conversation with your client about the market, what's going on, and get them to come up with an offer. Like sometimes they're going to ask you for your opinion. I highly advise that you certainly give them your advice and your input anytime you make an offer. And whenever we talked about our buyer meetings, as a reminder, this should be the second time that you're talking about market conditions in this particular area, right? So I've always said that your first meeting with clients, pre-qualify, go over the working with real estate agents, get them to sign a buyer's agency agreement, do all those great things. But I've always said, you have to talk about our market here. You have to look like a market expert up front, because when you go out to look at houses and they came from New York and got destroyed on their house, and took an offer at 75 grand less than they were asking, they think they can do this here. So if you had that conversation up front and reminded them what our market is all about and what's happening, at least you're putting that nugget in their head at the very beginning, and you're looking like a market, wow, you know, Jilma really knows what's happening in this market here. You know, she has her pulses on the market. She knows what's going on. Because the flip side of that, if you've never had that conversation before ever, they find a house they like, you're sitting down to come up with a price on the offer, and this is the very first time you're talking about our market, they think that you're trying to get them to do a full price offer. Oh, well, they get more commission if they do full price offer. They're not really looking out for my best interest. They're just saying whatever they need to say to get the offer accepted. They're not looking out for my best interest, right? So that all of a sudden, just because you didn't talk about it earlier on when you met with them, their view of that whole conversation could be a little bit skewed, even if you mean well. So if early on you already had a market conversation, now you say, hey, remember when I told you that everything in this neighborhood is selling for about 98% to asking price? Well, 98% to asking price on this property is $200,000. What do you think about that, right? So you're reminding them what the market is, and hopefully they listen to your guidance. Or if they're going to lowball, it's not going to be as bad. They're not going to be like, well, I was going to go in at 125. You know, maybe instead they say, well, let's try 175. And you can say, well, that's still pretty low. And this is what the consequences are going to be if you go in low. And we'll talk about that later. But there's definitely conversations around why they shouldn't do that. But now's not the time. So again, we come up with the price. We put it in here, right? I'm going to give you a cheat sheet that has all the blanks on there, so that if you have a client that loves a house and they want to make an offer, you literally take this cheat sheet and say, hey folks, real quick, let's go over what I need to go fill out the offer. And then let me buy you lunch or go get lunch. And then I'm going to fill this out. I got some questions I need to ask the listing agent, get some disclosures, and then we'll either meet back or I'll send these to you electronically, right? So I'm going to have a cheat sheet so you can fill out all this stuff so that you're prepared to fill this out and they're not looking over your shoulder. They're not sitting with you while you're filling this out, because it's a little bit easier to do that way, right? Hang on one second. All right, hang on. All right, cool. So the next thing is, as we go down this, right? The top line is your offer price. Now the next line is by due diligence fee made payable and delivered to seller by effective date, right? So in North Carolina, we have this due diligence period, which is basically the buyer's right to inspect and do investigations on the property. And they can walk away from the contract for any or no reason at all during that period. And the only thing they're going to lose is this due diligence fee. So their earnest money and everything else they put in this deal is basically protected through the due diligence period. So you're basically buying the right to do your investigations, to take the home off, and to be able to walk away if something comes up, or if you just change your mind, to be honest with you. So typically we need to come up with a dollar amount to put in here to say, hey, Mr. Seller, I want to buy your house. I know it's going to be off the market, and I know I have the right to do my investigations, and here's how much I'm willing to pay you for that. Now, as you go through this checklist, when you're talking to your clients to fill this out, there are some things you can't just be like, all right, give me how much you want to pay. Give me how much you want for DD. How much do you want for earnest money? Okay, when do you want to close? Some of these things you're going to have to walk them through and discuss with them, right? And this is one of them. So you need to explain that to them. Say, hey, you have the right to do all your investigations, home inspections, termite inspections, look at the zoning, make sure that there's any restrictions or covenants on the property that you want to know about, things like that. And during that time, you can walk away for any or no reason at all, but you have to pay for the right to do these investigations, right? So with that said, for you all, I want you to know that you could put 0 there. You don't have to pay for it, but you're probably not going to get an accepted offer, right? So here's my question to everyone on the phone call. What is a good amount to put there? Like, what would you put on, let's just say that you're going to close in 30 days. So how much money would you put down, and how long would you ask for a due diligence period, for that period to investigate the home? Anyone?
1%.
Was that?
How about 1%?
So I like 1% for something else, but not necessarily for the due diligence fee.
1,000.
So
It depends on the price of the house, the property, right? Well,
I was thinking 2%, 2 weeks.
2%, 2 weeks. So here's my suggestion. There is no right answer. But in most cases, the first thing I need to know is there multiple offers? If there's multiple offers, the more you're willing to put in due diligence to show that your buyer's serious.
Yeah.
It's a higher risk for your buyer, but the reality of it is they're more likely to get the contract. So you have to discuss that risk with your client. However, if there's no other offers at all, again, I do look at the price point. If it's a $200,000 house and I want it off for a couple of weeks, then there's two ways I can look at this. I can certainly say, hey, God, let's just put in a number that we feel is that you're comfortable with, that is not a crazy number. So like whether it's, you start with $500, right? And see if we get away with it. That's perfectly acceptable when it comes to due diligence fee for 2 weeks on a $200,000 property. However, the problem with, if you put in an arbitrary number, like you just say, well, let's just put $300 in there. Let's put $500 in there, which again, I'm not telling you not to do that. But the reality is if you take the time to come up with a number that was calculated, that you can explain to the listing agent how you came up with it, so they can explain to their client how you came up with it, right? And because if you do that, you're probably gonna get less pushback. Because the reality of it, let's say you just put 250 in there, and there's really no reason behind it, you just put 250. So let's see if we can get away with 250. There's a very good likelihood that the listing agent is gonna say, hey, the offer looks, let's go back and just tell them that we want 1,000 for due diligence, or 750, or even 500, right? But what if instead you said, hey, look, the due diligence fee that we put in there, we basically look at a $200,000 house, and we don't know exactly what your mortgage payment is, but we're going to assume that on a $200,000 house that your mortgage payment is about $1,200. And we are going to be taking your house essentially off the market because you're going to be contingent with us. And for that 2-week period that we have it off the market, we want to basically cover half your month's worth of mortgage. So we put $600 here. Does that make sense? So now not only do we put a number, but we said, this is how we came up with this number. We don't know that it's 100% accurate for what your mortgage is, but we felt that on a $200,000 house, that it's fair to say that your mortgage might be about $1,200, and we're going to have your house under, a due diligence period for 2 weeks. So for that, we want to pay about half your mortgage. Does that make sense?
mm-hmm.
Yes.
Now the only thing is, as you get into really high-end properties, you might not want to do that. But I would say that you might. Like, so you get into $1 million home, that number's gonna be much higher. But you got to remind your client, you're buying $1 million home. The due diligence fee, the seller's probably looking for a much higher number on this property, right? So again, run your business the way you want. You could certainly put in a 250, 500, just see what you can get away with at a lower number, especially if there's no other offers. But if you want a plan of how you came up with it and how to explain to your client so that they can agree, so that sounds like a good number and I like how you came up with it, that you can then make sure you tell the listing agent, this is how we came up with it. You'll get less pushback on your number, right? So due diligence fee is written out to the seller or sellers. That check is not written out to the attorney, the closing attorney, or the listing agent if they hold escrow. It is literally written out to the seller. If the seller accepts your offer, it's gone. If they accept your offer, you've spent your due diligence fee, right? You bought the right to do all your investigations. So if 3 days later you wake up and say, this is not the property for me, can I get my due diligence fee back? No, you cannot. You went under contract. We wrote the due diligence check to the seller. They've already put it in the bank. But if you continue forward and close, you do get credit. It is going towards your purchase price. You do get credit for spending that money. It's not separate from the $200,000. It's part of it. All right. So is there any question about that? Due diligence is for a period of time to do your investigations. It's spent as soon as you go under contract and it's written out to the seller. Now, in terms of the length of due diligence period, I would tell you that unless it's a cash buyer that wants to close quickly, is not worried about appraisals, isn't even really worried about inspections, they're flipping a house, they do this all the time, then maybe you do like a 10-day or something like that. But other than that, you probably never want to have anything less than about a 2-week period. And honestly, I would always try to get away with about a 3-week on a 30-day closing. So I would start with like a 20-day period. And the reason being is at the end of your due diligence period, your earnest money, which is what we're going to talk about next, is on the line. So that's the 1%. Somebody brought up 1%. So in normal cases, I would say your earnest money, which is going to be on the line after the due diligence ends, that's going to be about 1%. So in this case, let's say it's $2,000. Your $2,000 is going to be on the line at the end of the due diligence period. And let's say you didn't give your client enough time for due diligence. Sure, they got their inspections done. Sure, you negotiated repairs, but the lender took their time getting an appraisal. And you gave them 12 days for due diligence. And day 14, your lender comes back and the home didn't appraise. You're beyond the due diligence period. The seller doesn't want to reduce the price. Your buyer doesn't have the funds to come up with the difference. There's nothing in the contract that's saying, hey, the house didn't appraise, we get our earnest money back. The old contracts did. This doesn't say anything like that. This says you better figure that out during the due diligence period. If you found that out afterwards and the seller doesn't want to budge, you've lost your earnest money. So you need time in your due diligence period, not only for investigations, inspections, you need to make sure that appraisal comes back, right? So keep that in mind. Now, we'll talk later, but there's definitely forms. If you're getting near the end of the due diligence period and you don't have the answers, the sellers haven't agreed to your repair request, you haven't got the appraisal back, then you need to extend the due diligence period. And if you don't extend it, then you need to talk to your client about what could happen if the seller doesn't agree to your repairs or the appraisal doesn't come in properly, right? So protect your client. Try to give them about 20, 21 days on a 30-day closing. On a 45-day closing, I would try to give them like even more, like try to give them 25 days or something like that, right? But if there's no other offers, I always say low due diligence fee, longer due diligence period, ask for a home warranty. I mean, don't come in at full price if there's no other offers. There's things that you can do if there's no other offers. Now, if there's other offers, a lot of these things are off the table. Full price offer, no home warranty, higher due diligence fee, higher earnest money, shorter due diligence period. Those are all things you would do to win in a bidding war, right? All right, so is there any question about that? Real quick, due diligence, check written out to sellers, spent right away if you go under contract, but it provides you, it's paying for that amount of time. That we'll say in this case, let's ask for like 21 days. And then once the due diligence period ends at 5 p.m. on that 21st day, then the earnest money is going to be on the line. And in this case, we're going to say that that's going to be about 1%. So we're going to say $2,000. And on this one, let's just say that we said $600 for this. Now, the other thing you can do is you say, well, look, I want the entire thing to be 1% of the total. So I'm going to do 600 here. So to be fair, I'm going to do 1,400 there. And I'm going to say that we basically are giving you about 1% between the two. And I think that's fair as well, right? So either one. Now, what I did here, though, as you can see, is I did not put it under initial earnest money. I skipped that line. Here's my thought on it. This money, this $1,400, is no one but the buyers during the due diligence period. The buyer is protected. If they walk from this deal during due diligence, they get this back, right? They're not going to see the $600, but they would get the $1,400 back. If you put this $1,400 in place at the time of contract, even though the buyer is owed that money per contract because they got out of the contract during the due diligence period, If it's in place already, you put it in day one, the attorney can't release it without both parties agreeing to release it. Now, if the buyer had to go after the seller, they'd win. They'd say, look, we canceled during due diligence period. That money's mine. That's what the contract says. But why would you want your client to have that held up, waiting for the seller to agree to that or to sign off on that? Because it was theirs in the first place. So what I tell agents is, in most cases, skip this line and make it additional earnest, and the word additional can be taken out. So by earnest money deposit made later is what this is saying. And what I tell agents is make the earnest money due at the end of the due diligence period, because that's when it's on the line. So why put it into play when it's really protected anyway? So tell them, hey, we're going to get a check made out the seller. If they accept your offer, it's gone, it's spent. You get credit at closing for it. But once the due diligence period, once your investigation period is over, you're going to have a bigger amount of money on the line, but I'm going to get that from you at the end of the due diligence period. Because one, that's when it is on the line. And two, for you all, what you need to understand is this is a reminder to you that I need to have a discussion with my client that the due diligence period is ending. Hey, Mr. and Mrs. Smith, just want to let you know that we've got the repair request back. The seller's doing all the repairs. We've got the appraisal back. It looks great. Everything is going forward really smoothly. I can't wait to make sure that you close, with no hiccups. Do you have any questions? Is there any concerns? Because today is the end of your due diligence period, and today we need to make sure that the $1,400 is turned into the attorney, the closing attorney, who's holding escrow. Right? So it's a reminder to you to make sure that did everything happen that was supposed to happen during due diligence, or do I need to try to extend it? And this money better be in place. Now, with that said, if they're local and they can go get a cashier's check, because they must do certified funds if they do additional. Up here, they can write a personal check, but down here, it needs to be certified funds. So if they're local, certainly they can go get a certified check and get it to the attorney same day. But if they're up in New York and it's due on Wednesday, then you're going to want to call probably the Friday before, Monday at the latest, and say, hey, your due diligence is up this Wednesday. I need you to go get that $1,400 and send it to the attorney. Here's their information, right? So make sure that you're having that conversation a few days beforehand, that they're putting it in place so that it's there on time, because this is a time is of the essence, meaning it has to be in place on that date. So what am I going to do? If I said that I'm going to close on May 30th, right? So we're just saying that my due diligence period ends May, hang on, let me click, you get a calendar, but I can't see it, of course, because, no, it's not working, so I'll just type May. Right? So I know that before 5 o'clock, if they're local, I need to have a conversation to make sure this money is getting into the attorney that day, right? And then, remember that attorneys have business hours too. So have that conversation about a recap of your due diligence. Make sure that everything went smoothly and that this money's on the line as of 5 o'clock today. We need to put it in place. And again, if they're out of town, have it earlier on. So again, we have the offer price, we have our due diligence fee, and our earnest money that we're going to put in later. All this top number minus these bottom numbers is what you're going to have to bring to the closing table. Now, you see these other things here that say by assumption. Very few loans are assumable now, and if you think that one is assumable, get me involved. If we're going to fill this out, I want to be a part of it to make sure that it truly is an assumable loan so that we're not wasting anybody's time. The next one is by seller financing. Again, get me involved. Some sellers will finance a property, but more and more you're going to come across, and this will happen in your career, you're going to come across where a listing agent put that the owner would do seller financing, and it's a newer agent, and the newer agent doesn't realize how that works. And maybe they do a rent to own, but if they have a mortgage on the property and they need your money to pay off their current mortgage, they can't do seller financing. In order to give title to you and to close, they have to pay off their current mortgage. So the only way they can do seller financing is if that balance is low enough that they can just pay it off no matter what you give them, or they don't have a mortgage, right? But if they have a full mortgage that needs to be paid off and they need your funds to do that, seller financing is not an option. That would be more like a rent to own. So there's questions we need to ask to make sure that can a seller financing really happen. Building deposit, again, a lot of new constructions use their own contracts, so this wouldn't even be an issue. But on occasion, there are some builders that use our contracts and they would want a builder's deposit up front. And typically that's going to be in lieu of your earnest money. So they would take a builder deposit, especially if you're asking for changes and, you know, custom things being done to the property. But we'll talk about that later. Luckily, most cases, builders use their own contracts, which are very builder friendly and very non-buyer friendly. And we'll talk about that later. All right, so again, top line 200 minus our due diligence fee and earnest money. This is what they need to bring to the table. That includes, they say cash, but that includes your mortgage. So of that 198, later on, you're gonna see that part of it could be from a loan and part of it could be what you're bringing to the table yourself, okay? But that doesn't matter to the buyer, the seller just knows that this is the rest of what you need to bring to the table, right? Any questions about any of that so far? Again, I know I take a long time going over that, but I think it's really important that if you understand how due diligence works and how to protect them and not have them write that bigger earnest money check till they have to, those things help you with your client. Because if you just fill that out for them and don't discuss due diligence and how it works, and the fact that, you know what, that earnest money is protected during due diligence. And because of that, let's not even get that right now. If you don't have those conversations, you get buyer's remorse. They lose sleep because they just know that they've committed to something they don't understand. And the next day they don't want to do it anymore. But if you explain how it works and how they're protected and hey, here's how things are going to go. And here's how I'm going to help you get to the finish line. I'm going to help you with the inspection, blah, blah, blah. And here's how it works. Then they will go to the closing table and you won't get that buyer's remorse nearly as often. Okay. Any questions? Okay. We do not hold earnest money at Grow Local. I don't feel like balancing that account once a month. It's a headache. So, and there's no need to do it anymore. So the earnest money is always going to be held. In my opinion, you should have it held by the buyer's attorney. So in North Carolina, the buyer, instead of a title company, we use closing attorneys, and the closing attorneys will act as the escrow agent. So a lot of listing firms do have an escrow account and will hold it, but I still highly recommend putting it with the attorney. And you say, well, why does that matter? You know, could the listing firm do something with it? No, they have to follow the same rules. So if you put it with RE/MAX and they're the listing firm and your buyer wants out, both parties have to agree to release it before RE/MAX can do anything with it, just like a attorney. And the RE/MAX firm can't say, well, we represent our client and we're going to do everything not to give you that money back. That's not going to happen. They see the contract, they know who gets it. But if their client isn't acting right, they're going to say, well, look, we agree with you, but our client's not signing anything yet. So I apologize, but I still can't release it yet, right? So that's not really the issue. It's not about, you know, RE/MAX is going to treat that money differently than an attorney. The reason I like you to put it with an attorney is because let's say that you put an offer on this particular property. And let's say 3 days into it, you get a home inspection and it comes back horrible. And your client's like, I really do not feel comfortable moving forward. And you say, you know what, I understand. Let's go ahead and terminate this contract. If you terminate the contract and they already put the $1,400 in earnest money with the attorney, then when you go on to your next contract, it's already in place, right? So you don't have to like get it back out, and you know, you certainly still want to release it. The attorney still needs to have paperwork so you can use it for your next deal, but it doesn't, you don't have to wait for a check from RE/MAX, get that, give it to your client then puts it back in their bank account, then they write a new check to the attorney again, the next property. It's all the same money, it just needs to be released from that one property to be used on the second property. And again, like I said before, the earnest money, you're probably not putting in place until the due diligence date is up anyway. So it's easier for you to deliver that or get that to the closing attorney who needs it in the long run anyway. Why have it delivered to RE/MAX who then has to get it to the attorney? Does that make sense? So in my suggestion here is your escrow agent, I say, hey, Mr. Buyer, in North Carolina, we use a closing attorney to transfer the property. Do you have a closing attorney that you like to use? 99% of the time, they're going to say no. Say, well, look, they're also going to hold the earnest money once you write that check later on in the deal. So I can recommend 3, or if you want, I can certainly set it up with, one of my preferred. And 99% of the time, they're going to say, just go ahead and use who you like. And I write it, so then I go in and I put, Wayne Roper, right? So there's my escrow agent. Now I'm naming him up front because he's going to do the closing. When I have a signed contract, I'm going to send to his office and say, hey, we're closing on May 30th. Here's the contract. But again, I'm not giving him that $1,400 until May 19th or whatever I put there, right? But again, I'm going to have that conversation, and Wayne's office needs to receive certified funds for $1,400 later on in the deal. Not only are they closing the deal, but they are the escrow agent. Any questions about that? I think I beat that up pretty good, right? All right. Due diligence period we talked about. Again, I would try to do like a 20-day on a 30-day closing, even a little bit longer on a 45-day closing. Because even appraisal aside, the last thing that I would tell you is that even if you get the appraisal back, you get all your inspections back, everything's going smoothly, we all know that these lenders don't seriously take a look at these files and give that clear to close until like days before closing. So the closer you can get your due diligence period to end to the closing date, the more protected you're getting your buyer. Now you will get pushed back if you make it extra long, and certainly don't keep it real long if you have multiple offers. All right, settlement date. I have stuff, you would think, well, Brian, here's something you can talk about for just 2 seconds and move on since you talked so much about everything else. Well, there is a little bit we got to talk about here. Please, please, please try to have a conversation with your client and explain to them that you rather them not close on a Friday and you rather them not close at the end of the month. And a Friday at the end of the month is a double negative, and 2 negatives do not equal a positive in this case, right? So try to explain to them that for the settlement date, what you would like them to do is schedule it sometime before a Friday, somewhere in the week. And if they need to do it towards the end of the month, you would prefer them not to do it on the last day of the month, right? The reason being is because everybody in real estate likes to use those dates. So I even did as my example earlier, I said May 30th, right? The reality of it is I don't want to do May 30th because May 30th is the last day of the month. And in this case, it's a Saturday. So I have to do the 29th. 29th is a Friday, double whammy. There's no way. Lenders and attorneys don't get to every deal on the last day of the month. Somebody's going to not close on time. And you have no control over that. You have no control over whether the lender or the attorney has a hiccup, right? It's almost always the lender, by the way. And what's going to happen is if you don't have this conversation and you put in the 29th of May is when you want to close, and your client thinks you are the best person in the face of the planet, they love you, you're their best friend now, they want you are over for dinner and wine all the time now, and they can't wait to refer you to all their friends. And then all of a sudden the 29th comes, they have a moving truck, they're out of their old property, and they're sitting there waiting to get in a new one, and the lender says, we're not ready for you, we're gonna have to close on Monday. And no matter how you try on the back end, behind the scene, to get them in this property for the weekend, the listing agent said, I'm sorry, my sellers had a bad experience. They are not budging. They are not giving you the keys. You cannot get into this house till it records. And you turn to your client and say, hey, look, I'm really sorry, but you're not going to close today. And they say, well, what's that mean to us? Well, that means that you can't go in the property until we close next week. And they said, well, Brian, we have a moving truck outside. We already sold our other house, which is out of town, by the way. So we just drove down in our moving truck. Like, what are we supposed to do? Right? And all the suggestions that you give them here's this place you can stay, and here's where you can park the truck, and let me call the movers and see what we can work out. And all the things you're willing to do on the back end, the stress that they have at this point, all of a sudden you went from their best friend to, I can't believe you let this happen to me. Right?
Yeah.
And it wasn't your fault. It was the lender's fault, right? So what I highly recommend is close on a Wednesday. Don't close at the end of the month. You close on the 27th, right? And the lender has a problem, and that buyer comes down and say, look, you know, I am so sorry this happened. Here's what I'm going to do to help you. Here's the calls I'm willing to make. Like, let's work this out for you. But the attorney and the lender feel very strongly that you're going to close tomorrow, the 28th, right? We're still going to get you in there before the weekend, right? Does that make sense? Now, the home run for you, the easiest way to do a deal, if it doesn't impact their rent for the next month or a mortgage payment for the next month, if they can pull it off logistically where it's not a money thing for them and they can close at the first week of the next month, those are home runs. The first 2 weeks of the following month, you're golden. That is your best bet. Because honestly, there's a lot of cases where you put that I want to close on June 4th. And the lender, the attorney ever comes back and say, hey, look, you guys can do that. We got the clear to close. We're ready to go. The attorney says, look, if you guys want to come in on the 28th, this Thursday, we can get you done. Isn't that a great conversation to have with your client that was expecting to close on the June 4th? Instead of, hey, we put the 28th, it's definitely not going to happen. They're hoping it will happen around June 4th, right? Two different scenarios, right? So try to pick a date that makes sense and try to, and I realistically, let's just say that they said, well, we need to be out the month before because we have to give notice for our rent. So we can't go into June. So I'm definitely not going to go on the 29th, the 30th. I'm going to go on that Thursday at the latest. I'd love it to be, or that Wednesday. I prefer to even do the Tuesday, but let's just do May 27th, 2020, right? Is everybody on board with that? Any questions about that at all? I promise you, there'll be one blank on this thing that I'll talk about in 2 seconds. I'm probably lying. I'll probably.
Yes, thank you.
All right. Items leased, not owned. Any items which are leased not owned by sellers, such as fuel tanks, antennas, salad dishes, and receivers, appliance, and alarm security systems must be identified here and shall not convey. Now, this is a seller's disclosure. So you can look on the MLS to see if they've disclosed that the Ring doorbell system doesn't convey. The property disclosure should mention anything that's leased and that shouldn't stay. So there's a couple places you can go to figure this out. But ultimately, it's up to the seller to correct this if you don't put it there. You represent the buyer. So it's perfectly okay for you to put that, nah, there's nothing. Everything that's supposed to stay, stays. Right? So it's the listing agent's job to make sure that that's a correct statement, right? Because if their client signs it and that Ring doorbell's up there, and that's a bad example because that's not leased. If an alarm system is up and, you know, or satellite dish or something. I mean, there's really very few things now, but let's just say it's an alarm system and it was leased and not supposed to stay, and their listing agent forgot to put that in there. That's on the listing agent, right? But to play fair, if they've mentioned that in MLS and you can see that there's certain things that are leased, to be nice and to make your contract, they're like, look, these people are being nice. They're, you know, working with me. Then put in there what they've asked for. They've asked for that security system, that satellite dish to be taken with them because it's leased. They'll go ahead and put it in there, right? Now, the next one is other items that do not convey, right? So again, you represent the buyer. And the seller in the listing in the MLS said, the chandelier in the dining room does not convey, right? But you don't care that it says that. You work for the buyer. The buyer wants the chandelier. What are you going to do, right? Buyer says, don't put that in there. I want it. Let's see what they say. So you send this contract over and the seller signs it. And under other items that do not convey, they forgot to put in the chandelier. Now, it's going to get ugly and it's going to be messy, but per contract, that chandelier would belong to your buyer. If they don't close or if they don't leave the chandelier, they'd be in breach of contract. Now, with that said, I highly recommend, again, play nice, play fair. If in the MLS they said this chandelier doesn't convey, then I would tell your buyer, look, we're putting in a strong offer. Let's play nice. Let's put that they can keep that chandelier. And if they say, no, I really like that chandelier and I want to keep it, then I also would say to my buyer, well, look, if we don't put it in there and they don't put it in there, then technically it's yours. But I got to be honest with you, we should probably discuss that up front, because if this is going to be an issue later on, then let's avoid it, right? Let's talk about it now. But so there's the right thing to do and the nice thing to do. But at the end of the day, this letter D blank here, if you put none, then everything that's supposed to stay, that's a fixture, better stay. It would be up to the listing agent and the seller to put in there the things that they want to take. So everybody with me, play nice and put it in there if you see that they want to take certain things that are fixtures with them. They want the mirror in the bathroom. They want the chandelier. If you see that and you want to play nice, put it in there. It goes a long way to play nice. But ultimately, D is a responsibility of the listing agent. If they fail to put it in there and they forgot, guess who's on the hook to fix that? The listing agent. The listing agent's going to be held responsible for that. The seller's going to be like, I specifically told you that this is going to be taken, and you forgot to put that in our contract. You forgot to mention it. You're the expert, right? So that listing agent's going to be the one that's going to have some issues, right? But the next one down is us, the buyer's agent. Here's where we can get ourselves in trouble, right? Personal property. This comes up a lot, and no matter how much I talk about this on my training, I will have an agent, I won't say once a year, probably once every other year, that will come and ask me, why, if the MLS said that the refrigerator stays, is the listing agent giving me a hard time because we went to the walkthrough and the refrigerator's not there, and we're saying that the refrigerator needs to be returned. And I said, well, what did you put under personal property number 3? Well, we didn't put anything, but the MLS sheet said that the refrigerator stays. And I say, well, do you remember this conversation when we were filling out the contract? It doesn't matter what the MLS sheet says. The MLS sheet also said that they wanted $210,000 for the property. How much did you offer? 200. Well, they wanted 210. They assumed that you offered $200,000 partially because you didn't want the refrigerator, right? Because you didn't put the refrigerator in there. So you have to put in personal property. I don't care what the MLS sheet says. If your buyer wants things that aren't fixtures to stay behind, you have to put it here. And don't make the mistake of saying, oh, well, the MLS sheet says that, so you'll be fine. No, 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 no. If they want the refrigerator, and that's the number one thing, the refrigerator. If they want the refrigerator, it's on wheels, it's not a fixture, you need to put that on this contract, right? And the way I would put that to protect your client is refrigerator that was in place on showing on whatever date. So or if you take a picture of it, or the model number, you can certainly put the model number, do something to protect your client. But at minimum, I would say refrigerator that was in the kitchen during showing on such and such date. That's the one that needs to be there, right? So that you don't go in and they switched out the side-by-side stainless for the, economy white, much smaller refrigerator, like the dorm fridge, right? So just be careful and make sure there's other personal property. There could be furniture, there could be other stuff. Now, with that said, try to limit the personal property, because it says right here, let's see where they put this here. The following personal property shall be transferred to buyer at no value at closing. But here's the problem. If you start putting in a bunch of furniture and stuff, they have value to it, so they do see that as value to your offer. So if you're offering 200,000 and asking for all these personal items, they're going to think that you should be offering more for the house, right? So even though it says at no value at closing, the seller certainly sees value to that, and it might impact your ability to negotiate on the property. So I would keep it to like refrigerators, stuff like that, pool equipment if there's a pool, stuff like that, that makes sense. If they want a list of items, I would make that outside the negotiation of the offer. Say, look, you want the house, whether it comes with this bedroom set or not, right? Yeah, great. Let's get the house done. Let's get the best deal we can on the house. And then let's negotiate the bedroom furniture separately, right? That's what I highly recommend. The other thing is lenders are stupid often. I hate to say that. There's good ones out there, but there are so many lenders that even though it's clear as day, it says the following personal property shall be transferred to buyer at no value at closing. The lender's going to make you come back and take off all the items here because they feel like there's value to those things and they don't want their loan to be impacted by saying that they're giving you a loan for a refrigerator and a couch and a TV, right? And then I go back to that lender and say, can you please have your underwriter read the full sentence? It says specifically that those have no value. So it already has the language in place to protect your loan. Nope, we want it gone. So you're gonna, in some cases, have to go back per lender and take all this stuff back out. Now, if you do that, the email is gonna be, hey, attached is a new page. What are we on of the or what are we, page 2 still? Page 4, well, at least we're on page 4. So we're on page 4. You know, here's the new page 4 of the contract. Please have everyone initial inside. We removed all the personal property, but just for our purposes, this email represents the fact that all the items that we agreed to in the personal property will still be there because that's what was agreed upon. This is just for lender purposes. We expect all those things to be there. Please respond that your seller understands that and send this back to us, right? So now you removed it from the contract because the lender is being dumb, but you've also protected your client because you have in writing that, yeah, we're doing this for the lender, but we're still getting all that stuff. And here's my email to prove that, right? Does that make sense? Or do a bill of sale or do something, okay? If the lender makes you remove it. All right, any questions about this? All right, let's keep going. Buyer representation. Buyer does or does not intend to get a loan. If the buyer is obtaining a new loan, buyer intends to obtain a loan as follows: FHA, VA, conventional down payment assistance, other could be like a USDA. Is it fixed or adjustable? What's the principal amount? What is the term and what's the percentage rate? Now, this is why it's extremely important when we talk to our clients that they got to get pre-approval. We're going to need this information for our contract. So make sure that you get pre-approved. The things that I would tell you is if they do, and you say does need to get a loan, certainly we need from the lender, what kind of loan is it? Now let's say in our case it's FHA, I'm checking FHA, right? Now, we know that FHA is fixed rate, so we're gonna put fixed rate. That's easy enough. Now the one thing that I highly recommend right here, which says principal amount of, instead of putting that the principal amount is $200,000 and an FHA loan is what, 96.5% loan to value, right? You're borrowing, you have to put 3.5% down on FHA, correct? So instead of doing the math and putting that dollar amount here, because you're negotiating an offer. Let's say you're offering 200, but the seller comes back and says, we're gonna not sell it for less than 205. Well, if you change it to 205, now you got to come back down and do the math of what is 96.5% of 205,000. Now you're changing all this down here. So make it easy on yourself. And we know that no matter what final price we agree upon, that since we're doing FHA, we are going to borrow 96.5% LTV, loan to value, right? So I always put under principal amount of loan is 96.5% loan to value of home, right? So no matter what we figure out, we're going to buy this for, that's always going to be the same on my FHA loan. Now, if they're doing conventional, putting down 20%, I'd put principal amount of 80% LTV. If they're doing some USDA, 100% LTV. VA, 100% LTV. Does that make sense? So just put that in there to save it so that if you end up going back and forth on the price, you don't have to come back down and change the financing part of it. Now the term typically is 30 or 15. So for our purposes, we'll put 30 in there. And rate not to exceed, you can certainly go off the rate that is on the letter. So if they're being approved for 4%, you put that there. If they're being approved for like 3.5, but the rates have been kind of up and down, if you want to add like 0.25% to it, that's fine. So, you know, if they said 4 and I put 4.25, or they said 3.5 and I put 3.75, that's fine. It's going to be that or better. Here's the thing. Our old contracts, believe it or not, said if I can't get my loan exactly the way we put it here, then I can get out of my contract and I can get my earnest money back. So if I couldn't get my, you know, oh, I got approved, but they would only approve me for 5%. That was reason to back out. You just need a letter from the lender saying no. I mean, it was so easy to get out of a contract because you're like, well, look, I can't tell you what to do, but if your lender is willing to say that they wouldn't give you your interest rate, you're home free. You got your money back, right? Now, this is just simply disclosure. It's just letting the seller know a little bit about you. There's nothing else to this. It's just saying, hey, Mr. Seller, this is what I'm about, and this is the kind of loan I'm going to get, so that when you decide to go under contract, you know what I'm dealing with. Now, in a multiple offer, it matters a ton to a seller. You know, are they going to take the cash offer, or are they going to take the 100% financing offer? Right? In most cases, probably the cash. Or two offers are exactly the same, but one person is going to put down 20%, the other person is only going to put down 3%. And they're worried that both offers, they went above asking price. They're worried about appraisal issues. Who's more likely to negotiate and come up with the difference? The 3% down person or the 20% down person? Right? So the reality of it is, it matters certainly in a multiple offer, but this is just disclosure. You got to disclose properly. And what I mean by that is if later on your client says, look, I'm not going to do an FHA loan anymore. I forgot I've still got my certificate of eligibility for VA. We're going to go that route. You owe an email to the listing agent to redisclose. It's not a huge deal. You just say, hey, look, you know, just want to give you a heads up on the offer that's signed. We put that they're going to get this type of loan and blah, 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 but they've decided to go with this particular loan. Now,
Brian, can I have a question here?
Yeah.
So if we write the offer to purchase as a cash and buyer decides not to buy cash, do we have to disclose this as well?
Yes, correct. It's a material fact. Because now this whole thing is contingent on them getting a loan.
Right. That's what I think. But in the post-licensing, she said that the teacher said that no, we don't need to disclose. They don't need to know if we buy cash or not.
I would say it's the opposite way around. So if they said they were going to get a loan and they're going to decide to do cash, then as long as they show up with the cash to closing, they've already disclosed in worst case scenario they're going to get a loan, then that's not a redisclosure because they're going to do the loan or better, which is cash, right? Mm-hmm. But if they're going to go from cash to now getting a loan, mm-hmm. I'll tell me who the teacher is. I'll call her myself. She's wrong.
Edna.
Yeah.
You can't go,
you can't go from cash to then getting a loan and not disclose that.
Yeah, that's what I find strange in the class too.
Yeah, you know, it's literally a material fact at that point.
I mean, you are lying. You are basically lying because you are saying we're gonna buy cash.
Well, and if that were the case, then every single human being would write that. I would tell. In fact, right now, if that were true in this training class right now, I would be telling every one of you to write every single offer as a cash offer because it doesn't matter.
Mm-hmm.
Right? I'd be
because
like, hey,
I had this argument in the class with her too. I mean, I was like, you are changing the seller's mind that you are offering cash. That's why she might accept the offer, but then you change your mind and go with a loan. That doesn't make sense, but she said no.
Yeah, so, I mean, I think she's probably using this next section down in this box that you're saying to the it's not conditional upon obtaining or closing any loan. some mortgage loan programs are different, blah, blah, blah. So there's this disclosure that's basically saying to them like, well, even though they're telling you that this is what they're all about, it's really not a condition of the loan. I mean, of this contract, whether they get the loan or not. It just, we're just telling you that it's what we're doing. But I still disagree with her 100% because the reality of it is, if you are going from saying that you are going cash and there's no loan representation at all, it's a misrepresentation.
Mm-hmm.
You have misrepresented.
I agree.
So, and I will literally call and get the Real Estate Commission's opinion on that. And I mean, I know what they're going to say, but if I can tell you right now, as an example, if I was a seller and I went under contract with somebody that said they were getting a cash deal and they ultimately didn't end up closing and they were stupid enough. Now, here's the caveat. People can get away with what she just said all day long. So I think it's unethical and it's wrong. But if somebody was like literally said, hey, we didn't close and I know we put cash, but we didn't close because I don't have the cash but we did try to get a loan and that didn't work out. So we're not closing. And I said, well, wait a second. Like, how early on did you know you didn't have cash for this? Like, well, we knew like after the first week. So let me get this straight. For the last 45 days, you've been trying to get a loan on this property and you couldn't do cash. To me, that is a complete misrepresentation of what you offered me, what this contract was all about, right?
Mm-hmm.
And I had the right to know that. And if they filed a real estate commission complaint, I'm almost certain that the buyer's agent would be in trouble for not disclosing that they knew that it was no longer a cash deal. So what I would tell you, since you're hearing two different things, always err on the side of protecting yourself. And so over disclosing in this case, so even if for some weird reason I'm wrong, which I'm not, but if I was, just go ahead and disclose it anyway. Like if your client says, I can't do cash, I have to get a loan, say, look, let me just make sure that the other side knows we're doing that.
Okay.
Let me just tell them what we're doing, right? Because I also would say, like, if you're going, again, and I said, if you're going from FHA to VA, it's a different loan. It's a different product. It's a different process. It's different steps. And here's another reason, right? Here's something for you. I said I was going to get a cash loan. I mean, a cash deal. I sent that to you as a cash offer. You accepted my cash offer. 2 weeks later, it's like, screw that. I'm not going to do cash. I'm going to do a loan. But don't tell them. The FHA appraiser comes through and says, hey, yeah, we'll loan it to you. But as you know, on FHA and VA, we're also pseudo home inspectors. In order for us to give you the loan, you have to have these two windows fixed. You have to have a railing put on these stairs. You have to, like, there's all these things the sellers have to do to this house for you to get this loan. And on FHA and VA and some USDA loans, appraisers actually put those stipulations in the appraisal. And you have to go back to the seller and say to the seller, hey, you have to do this in order for us to move forward. And it happens. So how do you explain that? Hey, I know it's a cash offer, but now, by the way, I'm doing an FHA. I didn't tell you. And by the way, the FHA wants you to put a railing on these stairs for me to get my loan. Right?
So if that's the case, does seller have the right to terminate the contract if they represented the offer with cash, then change their mind and we disclose it to seller? Can seller come back and say, oh, okay, you said cash, but now it's a loan. I'm holding my right to terminate the contract?
I would say that as long as you disclose, it's going to be very hard for them to do that because of this note. I think that when you disclose, you would say, look, it's just for pure disclosure and for knowledge. But again, this contract was never conditioned upon obtaining or closing any loan, right? So we represented, we told the truth, we didn't hide, but because we told, that doesn't automatically give you an out because we told you this. Does that make sense?
Mm-hmm. Yes.
All right. So let's keep going. Other property. Does the seller the buyer have to sell another property? Before, this used to be a complete additional addendum. It was the contingency sale addendum. It was a whole other document. Now they've added it into the offer to purchase. So if your client does have to sell a property or lease a property to qualify for a loan, then they would put that they do. and they would put the address, and then they'd have to put if it's under contract or when it's going to be listed. That's what this whole section's about. Now, there is no obligation for them to put that they have to sell, even if they plan on selling. If I want to buy your house and I know I can get the loan, I don't want 2 mortgages. I definitely want to sell my house. But I know that the stronger offer for me to say is I'm approved for that loan without selling my house, then I can put does not have to sell. I can disclose that I don't have to sell my house. Now, I might not move forward with the purchase years if I don't sell my current home because I don't want to hold 2 mortgages. But if, as long as I know and the lender says you are approved, whether you sell your house or not, then it's up to your buyer what they want to disclose. Does that make sense? This isn't saying that I'll move forward if I sell my house. I'm not going to move forward if I don't sell my house. This is saying I can obtain a loan if I sell my house or not. That's what this.
Oh, I didn't realize that. Okay, that's good.
Okay. So, if your client is qualified for a loan, they can go ahead and you could get pushback later on. And they say like, look, my client's not going to move forward. They didn't sell their house. And you will get an agent say, well, you checked that they didn't have to sell their other house. Say, well, look, that had nothing to do with the loan. This is my buyer's personal choice. Like they're not going to buy your house and carry a second mortgage. They don't want to do that. They've decided to terminate. And the seller can say, well, you're beyond the due diligence period when you made that decision. So we're going to keep your earnest money. And you can say, well, yeah, okay. My buyer's on board with that. And all parties move on. That's it. There's nothing else for the seller. The seller can't be like, well, you breached and you misled. I didn't mislead. I can get you something to write in today. Say, I'm still approved for my loan. I'm just not doing this. Right? Does that make sense? So again, this is, do they have to sell a house to obtain a loan? All right. And then if they do, let's just say they do, you'd put the address here of what they need to sell. And then is it already listed, which is a stronger offer if it's already under contract, right? Now, here's the thing. If you're saying that you do need to sell and it's under contract, or if it gets under contract later on, you have to give a copy of that contract to the person that you're buying the house from. Isn't that crazy? But you can mark out just about everything. I'm marking out the buyer's name of my house that's buying my house. I'm marking out all, you know what I'm showing them? I'm showing my address, where I signed. I'm not even letting them see the name of the buyer's signature. I'll let them enough that they can see it's signed by a buyer and a closing date. They're not seeing anything in my contract, right? And don't hand that over while you're negotiating this contract. You hand it over after you're under contract, right? Does that make sense? So that's just to prove that, hey, my loan is contingent upon me selling my home. And by the way, I did. It's under contract. So to make you feel comfortable, here's my contract proving that. But I'm not going to give details on my contract. You're going to see enough to know that it's under contract. But if you start putting how much you're selling your house for, they look up tax records, they say, oh, you're getting this much for your house, and you can spend more for my house, or I'm not gonna do repairs on this now because I know you're getting a bag of money when you sell your house. Or I'm gonna call, this happens, I'm gonna call the buyer of your house and see how things are going, or see how serious they are about buying your house, right? So the seller of the house that you're buying starts calling your buyer. Like, it's crazy. So you definitely, if you get in the situation where you are disclosing that you have to sell a house and you say it's under contract, or later on it comes under contract and you have to provide them with documentation, black out everything but a closing date and enough that they can see that somebody signed an offer for you with your address on it, right?
Brian, I have a question. So if you say that they do have to sell a house, but at the time that you did the contract, the house wasn't listed yet, it was going to be listed. Once it's listed and it is under contract, do you have to provide them with proof if they don't ask?
Yes.
Yes. Okay.
Yeah, because the way this works is that right here, let me get to it.
I think it was is listed, will be listed and actively marketed by a licensed real estate broker, is what I had clicked.
Yeah, and the reality of it is, I just got to find out where it says it, but it basically says, they actually changed the language on this. So they actually changed it. So
Okay.
It used to say that you had to provide that to them before the end of the due diligence period. And if you didn't go under contract or provide them with a copy of the contract prior to the end of due diligence, that the contract was null and void. But this, the way they wrote this, and I apologize, but they're actually telling the seller to try to get that from you prior to signing the offer. They're telling the seller. But what I would tell you, but here's the line that you need to keep in mind with your buyer. Failure to provide a copy of the contract shall not prevent this offer from becoming a binding contract. So don't give it to them.
Well, yeah, they didn't ask me for it, and due diligence is over tomorrow.
So, yeah, so they're saying to do it early on, but
So you're saying I don't have to if they don't ask?
correct. Yeah,
Okay.
the way they wrote it now, you do not have to. I would not worry about it. So
Okay.
they took out all the language about, you know, on the contingency addendums that we used to have, it basically said you need to prove to them that by the end of your due diligence period that you're under contract in your home. Otherwise, it's a voidable contract. And they took that out, which is good. So yeah, you don't need to. And in fact, the way this is written, there's really no repercussions if you don't give it to them. It's just saying the seller should try to get it. So I'm glad you asked that because it made me read it a little bit deeper. All right,
Thank you.
so residential property owners association property disclosure statement. Buyer has received a signed copy of the property disclosure, and then the next one down is have they received the mineral rights. So they basically say the same things. That's why I'm going to talk about D and E at the same time. The top line under D and top line are, did you get a copy of the property disclosure and did you get a mineral rights and gas rights? So the top lines, yeah, I got it. Before I submitted this offer to you, Mr. Seller, Mr. Listing Agent, my client has seen these and they've actually, with my offer, they're attached. My client has signed off on them. So here's my offer that your seller needs to sign. And here's the fully signed disclosures because you gave those to me and my client saw them, right? You checked the top box under D&E because you got them. If you did not get them, then you do not have to hold up your offer until you get those. Now, the real estate commission is going to say, if you check that you didn't get them because you didn't try, they have a problem with that. They said that you didn't do your job. So you have to try to get them. How do you try? You go in the MLS, go under documents, they're probably there. If they're not there attached, you call the listing agent. As long as you can prove that you tried to get them from the listing agent and they can't get them to you right away, meaning they didn't answer, but you have proof that you called. They responded and said, I can't get them to you for an hour, 2 hours, whatever it is. As long as you can show that you are ready to go with this offer, your buyer wanted you to continue forward with the offer without having those, but you tried to get them, then you can check the next box down, which says buyer has not received a signed copy of the property disclosure and or the mineral rights, and they have the right to terminate or withdraw this contract without penalty, including refund of due diligence for the next 3 days, right? And it's from when they got the property disclosure or from the third day that they went under contract, whichever happens first. You're like, well, that sounds confusing. So let me try to put this out there for you so you understand it. If we were together, I'd actually put it in front of you on like a whiteboard or something, but here's how it works. If you did not get one or both of those disclosures, you check the second box down. your buyer has the next 3 days to back out. And if they back out, they get their due diligence fee back. They're made whole, okay? They get their earnest money's already not online. They get their due diligence fee back. But it's 3 days from going under contract or 3 days from getting that document. So as an example, if Thursday, today, you put in a contract and the contract gets sent over to the seller and the seller signed it on Saturday, but Friday, they finally sent you the disclosure you're waiting for. You have 3 days from Friday to back out, not 3 days from Saturday. Now, same scenario, they signed Saturday, but they never gave you that other disclosure. Then you have 3 days from Saturday. Even if they give it to you on Sunday or later in the day, Saturday, it's either 3 days from when you finally got it or 3 days from when you went under the contract, whichever one happens first. Does that make sense? So, hey, Mr. Buyer, there's these 2 forms that you're supposed to get. One is describing all the things that the seller may know about the property. They would answer yes or no, or they might say that they don't want to represent anything at all and not really answer, but they have to give you this form. We don't have that yet, but we can still go under contract, but you have the next 3 days after they sign the contract or from when we get that form, whatever happens first, to back out. If you don't like something on that form, or if you never got it at all, this is giving you a right to back out while you're deciding if you're okay with moving forward without getting that document, right? So there's the conversation. Or the mineral rights, that's going to tell you if they decided that they're going to sell the property, but they're keeping the rights to what's under their dirt. They think there's gold and oil under there, right? And they're not going to sell that to you, right? So without that document, you know, you have 3 days to back out up front. Now, after the 3 days is up, you still have due diligence period. You can still do your investigations. And if they come back, you know, on day 5 and they tell you that they did sever the rights for mineral and oil, well, unless we can prove that they disclosed some other way earlier and they misrepresented the property, then on day 5, you're not going to get your due diligence back, but you can still back out and save your earnest money, right? So my whole point is get them up front if you can. If you can't, check the next box down and then tell your buyers they have a 3-day right to get out of this contract from the day that they get the disclosures or the day they go under contract, whichever happens first. The third box down on the property disclosure says that they're exempt from providing you with one. So new construction and foreclosures are your biggest exempt for property disclosures, okay? So if you're doing a new construction contract or you're doing an REO foreclosure, you can check this box. There's no 3-day right to get out. They're not going to get one. It's exempt from one, right? So you check that third box down. Under mineral rights, it's just foreclosures that would be exempt, not new construction. New construction is required to give you the mineral rights. We have mineral rights disclosures in North Carolina because of new construction. They're the ones that actually created this new document years ago. And new construction development was selling these homes, and I think it was Lennar. I might be wrong, and we're recording, so I'm not sure, but I think maybe. So one of these big builders was selling properties in North Carolina, and they were putting everybody into contract. All the buyers were happy in closing. Well, one day they finally sold one to a lawyer who read the contract, and they realized that they were not being provided mineral rights to the property. So they were buying the house, they weren't buying the dirt under the house, basically. And they felt that it was not properly disclosed, and they won, they were right. So they came up with this document where you literally have to say, are you aware of if the oil mineral rights have ever been severed? And are you aware, do you plan on doing it, right? So most of the time on these disclosures, it says they have no idea if anybody's ever, since the beginning of time, they just don't know. but they, the seller, doesn't plan, they're going to sell you the house and all the oil mineral rights. So it usually says no representation, no, is the way it usually says. All right. So any questions about any of those things? We good? Anybody need a breather yet?
Yeah, I need a jack. I'll be right back.
All right. If anybody needs a quick bathroom break, my coffee's cold. I'm only going to go till 12 o'clock. Wherever we end, we end. We'll pick up on another day. Sorry I'm so thorough with this, but I think it's really important that you understand it. A lot of this stuff is for your knowledge so that you can help your clients. And another part of it, though, is so that you can write really good offers, right? And keep yourself safe. But I think the more you know and the more you consider what you're putting and why, the more you're actually doing a service, a good service to your clients. So, all right. So here's the next one. Seller's representation. Now here's the thing with this. You're the buyer's agent writing up an offer for the buyer. How can you possibly make seller representations for them? Well, here's my suggestion. One, tax records and MLS do say certain things. Sometimes the MLS, the agent will, it's not a required field, but it will say whether the owners own the property for a year or more. But it's a very easy thing to figure out. Again, if I go to the tax records, which I tell you not to rely on MLS anyway, right? But you can start there and see what they're saying, and then you can verify it. If I can find my, oh, I need to go back, hang on. It's not working for me. So right here, you know, I have the sale date of 2003. Well, that's more than a year, right? So that's easy enough. So I can get that the owner has owned it for more than a year just off the tax record. So owner has owned at least a year. I can check that off. So again, I know I'm working for the buyer and I know that I'm making representations for the seller who I don't represent. But at the end of the day, we want this thing filled out so they can just sign it and go under contract. So the things we can find out ourselves, great. And some things we might not be able to find out right away, but we want to speak to what we want our clients, that's going to protect our clients. So let me keep going. So lead-based paint, we can certainly look on tax records again and see when it was built. So if you hit the buildings tab, this was built in 1950. Now there was a remodel in 1988, but 1950. So this would require a lead-based paint addendum. So we would check that this was built prior to, and now when we look for disclosures, we need a lead-based paint addendum. We also need to give to our buyer a Protect Your Family from Lead in the Home pamphlet. And if you just Google EPA lead pamphlet, it's the first thing that pops up, a PDF. You've got to give that to your client. You have to give it to your client before you present the offer. And then you are looking for this disclosure. And this is not one that you wait on. You need this disclosure with your offer. So the seller has to have already filled this out, letting you know, are they aware of any lead paint? And do they have any documentation about any lead paint? Most no and no, but you need that filled out from the seller and signed off by the listing agent. They have to sign it. So when you get it, you're showing it to your buyer, and then your buyer basically says, I was given my pamphlet about protecting my family with lead paint. I have the right to do my investigations. And there's one other thing I can't remember off the top of my head. And then basically you're signing that and your client signing that, okay? Now assessments, to the best of the seller's knowledge, there are or not any proposed special assessments, if any proposed special assessments identified. Now you could certainly call the local municipality, the town, you can call the HOA, find out if there's any. But at the end of the day, it's up to the seller to disclose this. So we want there to not be any, right? So we can go out and check, but in most cases, we're gonna put that there are not any special assessments. And then under identify, you could certainly put none known at time of offer. Something like that, right? But please go out of your way and check property disclosure, because if you do have a property disclosure, that should be one of the items that they disclose if there's any special assessments, right? You can
All right,
call-
let
Yep.
me ask you something. Suppose I saw one last night that said, in this instance, that the seller's agent was saying that it's the HOA responsibility, but they're supposed to, the listing agent should also be responsible because they're getting information from the HOA.
Yeah, so I mean, the disclosure itself, if it's an HOA special assessment, it's still the responsibility of the seller and the listing agent to tell you what that is.
Right, but on the disclosure, they put the HOA is responsible. That's what they typed in. And they
Or
should get it from the HOA and fill it in.
Yeah, I'd have to see what how they refer to that to make sure that I understand why they're saying that. So normally they would disclose it's an assessment from the HOA, or if they're saying that whatever the issue is, the HOA is going to repair it, then that's not necessarily an assessment. They're just letting you know that the HOA is going to handle fixing that particular problem. But so I'd have to see exactly how they wrote that to answer your question properly.
I was just scanning through and I looked at that.
But I can tell you that if they're talking
It wasn't
about,
anything that I was interested in. I thought
if we're talking about
they're
what,
saying they were about any assessments that or need to be paid on the property disclosure, and they said the HOA should know that. They were
Gotcha.
putting it off on the HOA. I thought the listing agent should have filled in
Yeah, so
part of that
yeah.
to tell you.
No, I agree. So yeah, they were lazy. So in your case, it was a non-disclosure. They're saying we don't know, but maybe the HOA does. So we're not telling you either way. But what I would tell you is that if you go back, let's say you call the HOA and the HOA in one phone call told you, yeah, there's a special assessment that's been in place for 3 months and we're putting in new sidewalks and every owner has to give up $1,500.
Mhm.
And if let's say you made that phone call, like, a few days after you went under contract, even though they said HOA should know, I would argue that it was the real estate agent and the seller's responsibility. They could have easily made that one call and they
Right.
should have been aware and they should have disclosed.
Yeah, I agree with you. I thought so also.
So a lot of agents here put none known, but if any to be paid for by seller is what they write here. And they also do that under confirmed. So there's proposed and confirmed. And so let's just say that you put are not any. And again, let's just say under both these you put none known, but if any to be paid for by seller. It doesn't make any sense. You can't put that in there on one of these. If it's a confirmed assessment, the contract says that the seller has to pay for it at closing or prior to closing. But a proposed special assessment, you can't write none known, but if any to be paid for by seller, because that's almost physically impossible. What you're saying is that they're proposing that even though you have a well, that in 5 years, they're going to put in city water and that you're going to have to tap into it and it's going to be a tap-in fee. And you're saying that there's none known right now, but if there's any proposed and we find out during contract that, yeah, 5 years from now, there might be a fee to tap into the water, you can't hold up the closing and say, well, Mr. Seller, you're going to have to pay me for that 5 years from now. It doesn't work that way. So it specifically says on these sections, it says in this blue block, 6A and 8K, tells you proposed assessments are the buyers, confirmed assessments are the sellers. So what you put here is what you know. If there's any, you put them. And if there's not any that you know, then you put none known at the time of offer, right? So that's what you put here. You don't need to say who's going to pay for them. The contract already says that in another part of the contract. And the contract also says if anything that you write in here is in conflict with what the contract says, guess what wins? The typed part of the contract. So you're wasting your time by putting none known, but if any to be paid for by the seller under a under a proposed special assessment. Because you're in conflict with what the contract already says. Okay? Are you good with that?
Yeah.
But please look at the property disclosures, try to do a little bit of your due diligence when it comes to these things. In most cases, you're okay. And in most cases, during due diligence, some things will come up. And again, if it's confirmed, well, then the seller is going to be on the hook for that. All right. Here's where we list any HOAs. And you check that there is no HOA. You put the name of the HOA, if there is one. Or the name of the company. And then when are the dues? I mean, how much are they and how often? So if you pay $125 a quarter, you put $125, and then you put quarterly. Or if it's $500 a year, you put $500 per year, or $50 per month. Does that make sense? And then underneath, you put the name, address, and phone number of the HOA association. So in most cases, it's HOA company. So if it was like William Douglas is one of them, you put William Douglas, and then you put the phone number to the person that manages it, and the address for them. And then under here, you can put the website. And usually this link for the website, I like to go and find the link that brings them right to their community if you can find that. Otherwise, you would just go to the main landing page of the HOA company, right? Now, they have two of the same, because sometimes, like if it's a townhome, there's a main HOA and then there's a separate HOA for the townhome, right? So some of them have more than one, so it's the same exact thing, but if you have to name more than one HOA. Any questions about that? All right. This right here is how do you want the deed made out? So you're going to have a conversation with your client. Who's going to be on the deed and how do you want your name to appear on the deed, right? And by the way, Mr. Married buyer, even if you don't put your wife's name on there or husband's name on there, they have marital rights and you're not going to be able to sell this without them. So, it's up to you how you're going to put it. Now, in most cases, it's going to be like, husband and wife, things like that. You don't necessarily have to put how they're going to take the ownership. You don't have to put the exact type of the, whether it's, what am I trying to say here? Joint tenancy or whatever, like what kind of ownership it is, just put the names and how they want them to appear. How they're going to take ownership can be discussed with the attorney a little bit later. Does that make sense? So it's typically the same name spelled the same way as what you put under the buyer section, but ask your client. Now here, right below, it's kind of a weird spot to put it, but under that, we are putting, if we want the seller to pay for some of the buyer's closing costs. So in our contracts, it's a blank. It's asking us to put something here. Now, if your client doesn't want to ask the seller for them to pay any closing costs, you can put 0, or you can put NA. Now, just so you know, anytime you're filling out something that's not a number, so this is asking for a number, but you want to type NA, you have to hit the space bar to override what it's looking for, and then you can put in the letters, right? Oh, it jumped back all the way up. My screen jumped up. Hang on a second. So you just hit space bar and then you can type whatever you want. And I'm going to put NA. But let's say they wanted to ask for some closing costs. Here are my thoughts on that. One, first, you got to tell your buyer, your offer of $200,000 is not $200,000 anymore if you ask for closing costs. It's $200,000 minus whatever this number is. So if you ask for $3,000 closing, your offer is $197,000. You need to be perfectly clear on that, Mr. Buyer. Like, your offer is no longer $200,000. They're walking away with $197,000, right? minus all their other closing fees, right? But for the, your offer is being deducted here is the way you got to look at this, right? So that's conversation number one. Number two is if there's no other offers and your clients need closing costs to help them, put it in here. What I would tell you is that you need to make sure that you're asking for something that makes sense. Now, if your client needs all the closing costs to be paid for, they don't have funds for closing costs, then make sure you get them all in here. Talk to the lender. Some loans have guidelines of how much you can ask on this, right? So figure out what you can ask. But in most cases, here's what I would tell you. If you have like a first-time home buyer and they said, look, we really want to do this, but we are really tight on funds. We want to make sure that all the closing costs are paid for by the seller. Again, I would probably have a conversation with the lender to talk about that, but I would make sure that whatever number I put in here is going to protect them and cover all their closing costs. But the conversation I'm going to have with my client is say, look, if we ask for $5,000 in closing costs, and it turns out that you only needed $4,000 in closing costs, even though we know the seller was willing essentially to take $195 for this property because we offered $200,000 and they're paying $5 in closing. If you only needed $4,000, you're not getting a check for $1,000. The person that benefits from us asking for too much is the seller. The good news is you didn't have to come out of your pocket like you didn't want to for closing costs. So what I like to do is talk to your lender, come up with a number that makes sense, that covers all your closing costs where you're not blindsided and have to come with some. But on the rare case or rare chance that we come up with a number and it ends up being a slightly higher, I don't want you to be upset if you realize that $1,000, $500, $30, whatever it is, got left at the table, meaning they were willing to give you $5,000, but they only had to give you $4,000. The good news is you were covered. You didn't have to come up with any closing costs, right? Does that make sense? So just make sure that they understand that. In most cases, we can find plenty to get them all covered. So if you ask for $5,000 and right now you're only at $4,000, there's other stuff you can get done. I mean, there might be a contractor that's willing to give you a receipt for something they're going to do after closing. And there's a way to get some of that money taken care of, right? So, so we'll talk about that later. But talk to the lender. Again, there are some that have guidelines that are like 3-6%, stuff like that, of the loan amount that you can ask for, things like that. So talk. But if your client needs it, fill it out. Here's a huge thing. If your client needs that and you forgot, that's a huge bad thing to miss, right? So if they need closing costs, don't forget to put it in here, right? And now it's a part of the contract. And shame on the listing agent if they didn't point that out to their seller. Because if the seller signs this, thinking they're getting $200 and their listing agent forgot to point out that, oh, by the way, you're also giving them $3,000 in closing costs, that's between them and their agent. Because they're under contract and at closing, we are getting $3,000 in closing costs if we put it there and we signed it, okay? Home warranty, 3 options. We don't want one, right? Paid for by the seller. Doesn't mean your buyer can't still get one. If your buyer's gonna get one on their own, it just has nothing to do with the contract. So it's not gonna be on here. But this is saying, no, Mr. Seller, we don't want to get you one. It's a multiple offer. We're not gonna ask you for one. Or the buyer can get one and we wanna let you know, Mr. Seller, you're gonna pay for it, but it's not gonna be more than a certain dollar amount. And we've looked at enough of these to know that like the $550 is enough to get the one that we want. And you can certainly help your client. We have brochures at the office. We also have reps that we can get you in contact with. But if your buyer wants to get their own and have the seller to pay for it, this is the line to do it. Or in some cases, the seller already got one because they know a lot of buyers are going to ask for one. Plus they got free seller coverage during the listing. So they're saying, yeah, we already got one for you. It said it on the MLS that we got one from, First American. And you can call the agent if they offered one on the MLS, but they didn't tell you who it's from. Say, hey, I'm filling out my offer to purchase. I just want to get this part in there. Who is it and how much did it cost? And the listing agent can tell you, right? From First American, it's $550. Great, we'll put that in there. Seller's already got it. We will gladly accept it, right? Any questions about that? So we're almost done actually. So I'm actually gonna go just a minute or two over. So if the buyer needs to move in prior to closing, or if the seller wants to stay in after closing, or if the possession of the property is subject to a tenant's agreement that's going to continue, like there's a lease in place, and that lease is going to continue on after they close, then here's where you put a check mark, and there's addendums that you would use. Now, I would tell you that a buyer possession before closing is a horrible idea, but sometimes it's necessary. So if a buyer needs to get in early, you can fill out this form that talks about if there's a fee, and it's up to you as the buyer's agent to put it in there if there's going to be a fee that they give to the seller, and then there's a per diem if they don't close and they stay in there, right? So I'm not going to go over that addendum with right now, but there is a way that you can literally get your client into the house prior to closing if necessary. It does blow up deals. If buyers want to get in, especially if, you know, prior to closing, they get in there and they realize the house has huge issues. They change their mind. Now they're not going to close, right? Or something happened to the property. So there's a lot of things that it's not a great reason to do a buyer's possession, but sometimes, again, your client didn't listen to you. They closed on that last day of the month. It didn't close on that last day of the month, which is a Friday. They want to get in this house. They have a moving truck. I'm certainly going to try to get them in with this buyer's possession, right? I'm going to add it to the contract that day, right? And try to get the seller so we can get my client in there and still close on Monday. So sometimes it's a necessity, but I would tell you, in most cases, try to not use it if you don't have to. A seller possession is equally, it's not equally as ugly. It's ugly, but not as bad, because the good news is you've already closed and you're paid, but things could still blow up. The seller didn't leave. So your buyer owns the house now. You got your commission check. The seller's staying in after for a few days, weeks because of moving, coordination, other things, right? So it's still not a great thing to do. It's not nearly as bad as buyer possession because, you know, truth be told, your client got the house they wanted and you got paid, right? So it's ugly, and sometimes it's needed in order to keep the deal going. They're out there, but if you're going to use those, you got to check them and use the addendums, right? And then we have all these other addendums. We're going to have another phone call where we discuss the vast majority of these addendums that we use a lot. We're not going to do that today, but in order to make those addendum a part of this contract, you cannot forget to put a check mark. A simple check mark is making that addendum a part of this. You send this offer out and you do it old school, you fax it, and the offer gets over to the agent, but the broker didn't see the addendum that was behind it that you faxed. You forgot to put a check mark. The seller signs this without a check mark, you're under contract. So a simple check mark is what's necessary to say, look, here's my offer, but it also is contingent on you accepting this addendum. So don't forget, if you're going to use an addendum, to check that you're using the addendum, okay? There's this identify other attorney or party or drafted addenda. It used to just say other, so you could start writing in some stuff, and agents were drafting things, which we're not allowed to do. So now they put that identify other addenda. So now all you're saying is you're checking this and saying we have a appraisal addendum, you know, something that's not above there that we're going to use. But if we're going to do that, whatever addendum it is, like we have an appraisal addendum that our firm uses that I had an attorney draft, right? So whatever we're explaining there, the actual document, the addendum needs to have drafted by an attorney or one of the parties to the deal. We as agents can't do that. And if you're going to do that, just get me involved. If you're going to use something that's not a pre-filled out addendum, and sometimes you will, you're going to say, Brian, do we have an addendum to deal with an appraisal issue? Because it's multiple offers, we're worried it's not going to appraise. We do want to go under contract, but we want some protection. Great, we have this appraisal addendum, check there, put it, that's appraisal addendum, and it's already been attorney approved and generated, right?
Hey, Brian,
Yep.
is that where the COVID-19 appraisal addendum would go?
So,
Or not appraisal, but the addendum? would go here?
Yeah, but the only thing with that is like the COVID addendum is 99% going to be filled out post-contract because you're not able to get things done.
Okay.
You're not normally going to fill it out with the offer because you're going to take in consideration when you write the offer. In most cases, not all the time, in most cases, you're going to write in the offer like knowing that it's going to take time to do certain things. So your due diligence dates, your closing dates should already be reflective of the fact that we're dealing with this.
Okay.
But with that said, there might be some that said, look, this is what we are shooting for, but we do want you to have this COVID addendum from the get-go because we are dealing with this. So if you do it that way, which is not a bad idea either, then yes, you put under other and write in that COVID. Absolutely.
Okay, thanks.
Great question. All right. There's literally just like a couple more things. We will be done by 12:15. All right. So down here is where your buyers and would sign. So make sure that all the buyers that are party to this will sign. If you have more than 2, then there's an additional signatures addendum where you can add the other buyers. So it's just blanks. The blanks is where you type in their name, they'd sign above it and date it. Or this is where you set it up later for digital signatures, correct? If it's a company, so everything below the hard black line is if the buyer ends up wanting to buy this through a company. If they're buying it as an individual, it's everything above the black line, okay? And then as we go down further, here's the last piece I really need to talk, or the second last. In the contract, the language says that whatever you put in these spots for buyer and seller notice is how you can communicate with the other side. So it's very important when you fill out this offer to purchase that you only fill out ways that you want the other side to communicate with you. Because anything you put on here, you're saying it's fair game. So first and foremost, under buyer's notice address, this whole top section where it says mailing address, buyer's fax, buyer's email, you always just cross it out. We are never, ever, as a broker representing the client, going to give the other side our client's mailing address, fax number, and email. Because if we do, again, per contract, we're saying you can go ahead and sign this offer, Mr. Seller, and you can mail it to my client directly. And when they get it in the mail, they would have been notified that we're under contract. That doesn't make sense, does it? Or you can email or fax my client directly to let them know we're under contract. So under buyer's information at the top, under we represent the buyer, just put a big X there, or NA for all that. Communication goes through you. You represent them, okay? Now, under confirmation of agency, this is where you need to fill it all out. But what I recommend on this part, selling firm name, obviously is going to be Grow Local, right? We're acting as a buyer's agent. The firm license number, if you want to write this down somewhere, but I can always give it to you later. 23760 is our firm number. I am not going to put in my mailing address. I do not, just like I don't want them mailing things to my client, I do not want the other side of this deal ever mailing me something. That's just not a way to communicate notice or anything that's due per contract. So I'm leaving my mailing address, I'm leaving it out. But I am going to put in my name. I am going to put my license number. And I'm going to put the number that I want them to be able to communicate with me. And I'm going to put my fax, if I want to use a fax, and I'm going to certainly put my email, right? That's somebody else's, but. Right? So the only other thing I'm going to do on here, I can play nice and fill out as much as I can figure out about the listing firm, but I'm certainly going to put in the listing firm's name, that they represent the seller. If I can find their firm number, like anything you can do to help out on this side, that's great. But minimally on this side, I want to put the listing agent's name and how am I communicating my side to them? If I'm emailing things to him, for her, then I should be putting that that's a good way to give notice through this deal. So minimally, if I'm going to fill out this listing side, I'm going to put the listing agent's name, their phone number, and their email. Because that's how I'm going to be communicating with them and sending my offers over. Does that make sense?
Mhm.
So this is not necessarily a part of the contract that the clients have to sign, but it's saying that this is how we can communicate with one another. All right. And you're not communicating with my buyer. I'm not putting that in there. I'm putting my information and just how I want you to communicate with me. And minimally on your side, I'm going to put how I'm communicating with you already when I send my offer over. And if I'm playing nice and I can find your license number and the firm license number, I'll do that because I know you're going to need to do that for your broker later anyway. Right? Does that make sense? And the very last thing we got to talk about is this last sheet is this acknowledgement and receipt of money. So when you get the due diligence fee from your client and you hand it over, you are going to get a signature from, come on now, sorry, screen. You're going to get a signature from the listing agent. And then when you hand them the check, say, can you give me a copy? If you didn't make a copy yourself, say, please make a copy of this check and sign saying that you got this due diligence check from me. And I need a copy of the back of that, right? So you want a copy of the check and a copy that the due diligence fee was received by the listing agent. And then, by the way, later on, I want you, Mr. Listing Agent, to give me a signature from your client that you took my check that I gave you and handed it to the client. So they'll send you that notification. And then later on, Mr. Listing Agent, I will give you a signed acknowledgement that the attorney has received the earnest money. So again, we talked about getting that earnest money at the end of due diligence period in certified funds. And let's say your client mailed it to the attorney's office and then on Wednesday it was due. I'm calling the attorney's office and say, hey, my client said that they mailed it out Friday. Did you get it? Oh yeah, we got that in the mail yesterday. Great. Can you sign the bottom of page 14 acknowledging that you got the earnest money from my client and send it to me so that I can forward it as proof to the listing agent that we did our part. Does that make sense? That's it. That is the offer to purchase.
Okay.
I know it's a lot of information. I appreciate your patience. Is there any questions about any of this stuff?
Good.
No. Good.
Good
Okay.
discussion.
All right,
It
so
was helpful.
awesome. So if you end up doing your first, second, third, 10th, 100th, I don't care. If you need to sit down with me or get me on a phone call and do them together, I'm absolutely fine with that. If you're provisional, then I need to see them before they go out anyway. So just send them to me to kind of review. I have agents that have been doing this for over a decade that still send me their offer to purchases just for kicks. I'm okay with that. You know, that's what the broker part of this job is all about. And honestly, every once in a while I find something. Normally it's like, hey, I see that you left the seller paid closing costs blank. Was that intentional? And 99% of the time it's like, oh yeah, they don't want any seller paid closing costs. But every once in a while it's like, oh my God, I forgot that, you know? Or, you know, the home warranty, you didn't check anything. You know, you're like, oh yeah, you know what, they did want a home warranty. So stuff like that. So it's just an extra set of eyes. That's it. So the next thing that we'll do in terms of this stuff is we'll probably go back to some other kind of trainings, but at some point we will go through all the addendums and all the ones that we use most often. So sooner than later, just to kind of keep the flow going, we'll have another conversation, which will be a much shorter one. And we'll talk about a bunch of these addendums and how to fill them out and what you need to be doing with those. All right. Let's see, anything else?
Brian, are we sending the last page, acknowledgement of receipt of monies with offer to purchase?
Yeah, so I mean, it's usually a part of what you download and send. So and it's a 14-page contract. So yes, I always include every page even though nothing's really been done on that yet. One, because once you do, if they accept your offer, you want that other agent to already have that page. And it often already has the client's information on that page for you. So it just makes sense to include.
Okay, thank you.
All right, anything else? Anything else off topic?
No, I'm good. Thanks.
All right, well, thanks for joining in. If you have anything else at all, please reach out, text, call, email. If I don't talk to you before then, have an awesome weekend and hang in there, and we'll do this again next week.
Thank
All right.
you.
Thank
All
you.
right.
Bye.
All right, bye.
everybody.